Hello, I'm Edward, and welcome back to the second episode of the Robert Manzano's Teaching and Learning Strategies. So, as you can recall, the first episode was about identifying and understanding similarities and difference. So, we discussed some strategies that you can use in order for your students to be able to understand and know how similarities and differences can help in learning. And for teachers as well, whenever they have to explain some concepts. For this episode, we are going to talk about number two, which is summarizing and note taking. Okay, summarizing and note taking are two skills that have always been necessary for learning, particularly when we are doing lots of reading. And teachers will ask students to do summarizing, and then they take down notes, and that's how students can be checked for their understanding of what they have read. But for this episode, we're going to expound on how this can be efficiently done by doing 5 steps. But before we proceed, we will just talk about how Marzano discuss the summarizing and note taking skills. Okay, so according to him, it's important that people identify first the important information, and most of the time we can do that by scheming, and then we delete repetitive information by probably personalizing. Okay, and then what he emphasized is that summarizing should be creating your own version, which is, we are different in so many ways, and if people can do their own version of a particular article or reading, it'll be easier for them to understand. So whenever we summarize something, it's not always a version that fits everybody. We do that so that we can ourselves understand it in our own ways. So it should also be a form of active learning, which means whenever you do note taking, it's not just you're copying information for the sake of, having your own notes, but you should be understanding what you are writing yourself. And so we are going to do 5 steps in order to do summarizing and reading. Okay, so there are actually 8 methods in doing this, but we will only focus on the summarizing and reading. Okay, and we will be using mind maps for this one. The other 3 would have to be presentation skills, which we will be discussing in the other episodes. Okay, so we will just focus on the first 5 of this 8-step method. Now, let's start with scheming. Okay, we all know scheming as glancing or quick reading for some. It's important for us to understand why we are doing this. We are doing this in order for us to get a glimpse of what we are going to expect in the article or reading. So, in the broadest sense, we do skimming to have a quick understanding of what we are going to be learning, okay? So that we will not be surprised or we will not be bombarded with lots of information, as setting expectations on what to see or learn can help us in absorbing better information. Okay, so now let's talk about what to read while skimming. It's important that you look at keywords. Keywords are basically words that are more important than the others. So, for example, if you are going to read information about animals, for example, we will, of course, ignore information about maybe grammar things, words, articles. So we're not going to be paying attention to those things. We will be looking for maybe words such as the names of the animals, big words, processes, and stuff like that. So you look for the important words. And then sometimes when we read an article, there are words that are highlighted. If not, they are in bold. So do not skip those words. You have to read those words. And of course, there will always be titles that you have to read. And it's important to read the first and the last paragraph. The first will be giving you thesis or the introduction, what to expect. And the last paragraph or the sentence will have to be the conclusion. So this usually applies when you are reading research papers, articles, news, but not so much for storybooks. If you don't want to like be spoiled, so no spoilers for this. There. So these are important things that you need to do. That is for number one, scheming. Now, once you're able to know, like set expectations on what to read, we will now proceed with reading. Now, what is the purpose of reading? Many students will think that reading is just so they can practice how they speak or just so they can read as a requirement, but there's actually a very good purpose of reading. So we read to get general information. So this is the most important part. If you're gonna skip reading, then it's gonna be useless to read, right? If you will just do skimming and other stuff, then you won't be able to get as much information as you would need. So we read to get general information, and then we get specific information. So it's like looking at the bigger picture and looking at the details. And then we need to read so that we can inform the author's attitude. So whenever there's something that we are reading, we always tend to have the tone of the author. Okay, what is the author trying to imply? Is it to inform you? Is it to exaggerate emotions? Is it to convince you? So there's always a purpose, and you have to understand what the writer is trying to imply so that you get a better picture of what you're reading. Now, once you have reading, once you have done the reading and the scheming, we can now proceed with number three, which is mind map. So, mind map is, in simple words, it's a way to organize your thoughts into a better structure. Remember the first episode was about creating charts and diagrams, like Venn diagrams. So mind map could actually be a very, very useful thing to do. So similar to this one, mind mapping is separating categories ideas and branching them out into smaller details. This way, you can understand which particular aspect you need to focus on, and you will not rely too much on very basic and cluttered ideas. So, in simple sense, you can do mind mapping in order for you to understand what you are trying to discuss, what you are trying to understand. And you can only do this once you're done with reading, of course, so that you can separate the ideas, what the author is trying to explain. And by doing this, it'll be much simple for you to understand. The fourth one would have to be study. So you have already skimmed, you have already read, and you have created your mind map. The fourth step would have to be study. So what is studying? We all know studying is reading, but in general, it is the act of applying the mind so to acquire knowledge. Okay, and one good way to study is by looking at your mind map. You can memorize or you can easily compose your thoughts for what you're trying to learn. by studying. So you understand it by absorbing what you are reading or the information that you're trying to acquire. Okay, so in broadest sense, this is the acquisition of knowledge. Okay, so we study in order for us to learn. So memorizing is a different thing, but memorizing is part of studying. We do study by memorization, but it doesn't mean that if you memorize something, you fully study it. So studying involves critical thinking, understanding which ideas are necessary and which are not, and studying is simplifying the idea in a way that you can understand. So if you memorize a 100-page book, but you didn't understand exactly what that is, then it's going to be useless. Now let's move on to the fifth step. This is personalization. So after you study, you will now proceed with your note taking. Okay, so personalization involves highlighting, creating legends, and basically anything that will apply to you. So this will be different for everybody, depending, of course, on the materials that you have and depending on what you learned. So you can use highlighters, for instance, and you can set rules on which colors to use. So some people will use stronger colors for key people and lighter for something important. So there's actually no rule in this, but uh, there's always a guide that you can look for, and it doesn't always have to be expensive, meaning we don't always have to use a lot of materials for this. So you can improvise depending on what you have and the availability of the things that you have, for as long as you personalize it on what is available and what information you want to acquire. Okay, so note taking, for instance, is also something that is important. So some people are very organized with how they take down notes, and some people aren't. So there are many ways that you can take down notes depending on how well you can, or how much time you can exert. But it's important that you create a habit in note taking, because once you have to go back to information, it's easier for you to understand if you have a structure rather than writing down notes all over the place and you don't know where to look for. So personalize what you learned in a very organized structure, and it will be easier for you to learn and, of course, to teach. So that's it for summarizing and note taking. We're actually done with this episode. For the next one, we will be doing reinforcing effort and providing recognition. But for now, I hope you can apply both the first and second strategies that were given by Marzano, and hope you can apply this immediately to your classes in order for them to learn from you. So, again, this is Edward, and thank you so much for watching this, and have a great